I'm afraid that people are going to mock me because I'm the oldest person at the table and I'm the oldest woman at the table. So that's just an example of how we may hesitate, we may hold ourselves back because we believe that at a certain age we will not be promoted.
Welcome to another episode of The Wendy Cooper Show, Conversations with Remarkable People. I am getting rid of the 50, over 50, because that's a bit ageist. I think we talk about it in this episode. Today, I am talking to Bonnie Marcus. She's a certified executive coach, published author, speaker, Forbes contributing writer, and podcast host. Her first book, The Politics of Promotion, How High-Achieving Women Get Ahead and Stay Ahead, provides a roadmap for women to navigate the complexity of the workplace and positions themselves for advancement. Her second book, Not Done Yet, How Women Over 50 Regain Their Confidence and Claim Their Workplace Power, will be published in March 2021. Bonnie, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Wendy. It's great to be here.
Bonnie, I did notice that your Badass Women podcast is not in the intro.
You're right. I just said I was a podcast host. My podcast is Badass Women at Any Age, which is on Apple and wherever you listen to podcasts. And I decided to do this podcast because I wanted to highlight all the amazing women who I think by definition qualify as badass. And I use Katie Couric's definition that a badass woman is someone who challenges the status quo and the hierarchy and the patriarchy and shows up with a lot of confidence and power. And many of the women who've been on the show will say, what, me, a badass? I'm not really a badass. But when you hear their stories about where they started, some, abusive childhoods, just really incredible stories or obstacles that they've overcome in their career to where they are now, it really is inspiring. So, we often look at successful women and we say, wow, that's great. Look at, their CEO, they're running a thriving business, but we don't know how they got there. And so that's what the podcast is really about. I want to give my guests the opportunity to talk about their work, but from the lens of how does your story, your badass story, how does that inform the work that you're doing now? And that gets really interesting.
Well, that's pretty cool. So I'm sure that everybody will be checking that out because a lot of times we don't understand that the stories that we live through take us to obviously the place that we are today, no matter what age we are, but also a bunch of, we collect this wisdom that we then get to share and help other people grow.
Exactly. But I think that in general, Wendy, women need to own their power, own the power of their age, whatever their age, and really recognize that we all have badass stories. Doesn't matter if you're 28 or you're 68, we've all overcome certain things to be where we are, and we need to celebrate who we are.
Yeah, I agree. It's important to always celebrate life. And celebrate one's accomplishments and also be recognized for those. So let's talk a little bit about why both of us put a line of demarcation on things. Mine is my podcast of Remarkable People Over 50. You are writing a second book that focuses on women over 50. Do you find that odd? Like, are we being ageist? I don't know. I'm thinking about taking the 50 out of my Remarkable People tagline.
Right. And my show started out that way with my guests over 50. And I did change it because they're remarkable women, and I felt I was being ageist, but they're remarkable women out there who can inspire us with their story, and it doesn't matter what their age is. But my second book is about women over 50 in the workplace.
So, Bonnie, let me ask you a question. What do you mean when you say women face a double whammy?
From the time we're born, we face bias. And we're brought up with certain messages about what we should do and what we shouldn't do as a woman. And we face gender bias in school. We face gender bias in the workplace and in society in general. We're still not on equal status. We know that. We're not paid equally. And as we age, we also begin to face more ageism. And the combination of ageism and sexism, especially in the workplace, which is where I'm focusing, it hits women really, really hard. And it's not that men don't face ageism as well, but because our society is so it is worships youth and worships attractiveness, and that's what's valued so much for women, that when we show signs of aging, we face ageism earlier than men.
So that's kind of like the the thing where men age, men get better with age, and women basically don't.
So as women start to show visible signs of aging in the workplace, they face the consequences. And this really, really sucks. I mean, I interviewed hundreds of women for this book, and they're women who wake up at 3:00 in the morning in panic attacks. And they've had Botox and they've had filler. But, one woman in particular, she's 63. And she panicked that, she's going to lose her job. And then she said to me, and then who the hell is going to hire me at 63? I don't let anybody know my age at work. Mm-hmm. And so we face, the consequences of aging sooner than men.
Right, but men also face the consequences in the workplace.
But there's research that shows that as you show signs of aging, as you are viewed as less competent.
Well, I can see that, and I can also understand with the person that you were talking about having that fear, because that fear is very real. And I think research also shows that if you do lose your job, or or your position is eliminated, whatever, that it takes about 3 years before you're going to find another job. So you have to be prepared for that. I think there's a lot of data out there on that, and there's a big conversation about that with ageism in the workplace. So it's just doubly difficult is what you're really saying for women, which is what's new, Hasn't it always kind of been that way? But anyway.
I mean, for years, there has been research that has proven that when you have more women in senior leadership and more women on boards, your company is more successful. And so there's studies about that too, but it doesn't mean that companies are, in fact, promoting more women. We don't see any change necessarily in the number of female CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. Or board seats. So, yeah, I mean, there's research that kind of builds a business case for these things, but changes still don't happen.
Right. Well, it took a lot of years for that structure to appear, and it's been there for quite some time. So change is happening. I believe change is happening. More women are going into these positions. More women of color are going into the positions. I don't know if women of age are going into the positions, but that's something would be interesting. But change takes time, and I believe we're on the right path for that change, especially, when the conversation is pretty loud and clear these days. But let's talk some specifics. How do you think it really affects women in general? It might be a stupid question, but you're the expert.
How it affects women is they're marginalized. They're not invited to important meetings anymore. People don't seek their opinions, and it starts really subtly. Very often, they're the first ones to be downsized and pushed out the door. But in that process, before they're even given the pink slip, they are subjected to humiliation, called dinosaurs or over the hill, or, some of the women I interviewed heard remarks like, oh, you were around with Abe Lincoln, right? Or that oldie song, right? You were the. And so there's this constant bombardment of demeaning remarks that really affect women, their self-esteem, their confidence, their ability to maintain their status in the workplace.
That's, I don't come from the corporate world, right? I've been an entrepreneur most of my life. Prior to that, I was in the corporate space, but I was only in the corporate world but I was younger. I was much younger. I left it in my early 30s. But all I can relate that to is I took a gig about a couple of years ago, and it was a visual effects house now shut down in Burbank. And the staff was about 12 people. The men were very old school, although I really like them. I think they lived in this bubble in this 40-year-old visual effects house where they didn't understand what the Me Too movement actually was about, and that when I came to work there as an executive, they just didn't know how to talk to me whatsoever. We were all about the same age, but yet they didn't know how to talk to me like with any kind of respect or talk amongst each other when I was in the next office and I could hear everything they were saying. The boys' club still existed. They went out to lunch together. They never invited any of the staff. They never invited me until at the very end they started to. But it was just it was like I fell back in time, but that time existed today. And so, yeah, I can see remarks like that flying across the table. But I also think remarks like that are thrown across the table at men of age also. I'm sorry. I understand that women have always had a more difficult time. I am completely on board with that. But I think age is not okay. It's doubly worse for women than it is for men. I guess that's really what you're saying. So, okay,
Well,
I'm
see,
on board.
but that's the point. It's the combination of sexism and ageism that women face. That's the double whammy, because we've always been subjected to the type of environment and culture that you're talking about, although it is fading out. That that toxic type of environment isn't really tolerated in a lot of companies now.
No, and it shouldn't be tolerated anywhere, and it should have never been tolerated to begin with. So anyway, so what do you think the outcome is going to be, or what's the solution? What are your thoughts on that, Bonnie?
Well, I think I am hopeful that things are going to change. Many companies are leading the way to in their diversity and inclusion efforts. A lot of them, of course, are just checking the box.
Yeah.
But many companies are now reporting their progress.
Mm-hmm.
How many women have been promoted from within? How many women of color? How many women have we hired, and what's the retention? So especially public companies are now having to report these things and being held accountable.
Yeah.
And I think as we see a change at the top, the type of company that you were talking about is white and male and stale.
Yeah, I suppose so. That's very true. It was very white and very male. Yeah. Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to see things change, and again, as you mentioned earlier, change doesn't happen overnight. But I believe that the Black Lives Matter movement, I believe that the Me Too movement, Time's Up, um, there are practices that are changing now in the workplace.
Yeah.
I think there's a hypersensitivity, especially around Me Too, that has created a difference in the culture. But people are aware of it now.
Yeah.
That's a beginning.
The funny thing is that is age in the diversity and inclusion sector. Nobody ever says age. They just never say age. I'm sorry. They say white, black, gay,
There are a
LGBTQ.
lot of isms, and I think it's up to all of us to create that awareness that age is probably, outside of being human and being alive, it's the only thing we have in common. If we're lucky enough, we will all age. And so, though it's hard when you're young to project, forward how you're going to feel when you're older, um, but those fears are also ageist.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting because for me, that's just human nature. It's human nature. When you're young, you're learning, you're growing, and when as you get older, you build your wisdom.
Yeah, I'm a boomer. I'm a proud boomer.
Exactly, and but it's still not an excuse, right? It's I think it's a complicated situation because the people who are older want to blame the people who are younger. The people who are younger don't want to have to do anything to do with the people who are older, and yet it's not the new. We've always had younger people. We've always had older people. We've always had people in the middle. So why is ageism all of a sudden a thing? It just doesn't make any sense to me. So the problem is systemic from the younger generations looking at the older generations as though they have the plague, when the fact is that what shifted in our society to make you think, younger generations, that just because we are over 50, by example, we've lost our stamina, we've lost our brains, we've lost our creativity, we've lost any ability to function in the world. It's just crazy to think that that's how younger people look at us.
Mm-hmm.
They really do. And you're even really kind of saying that. Although they can get stuck in ageism for being younger, and we can say millennials are lazy or don't have the go get it.
And they're not interested. They are not
No,
interested.
they're not interested whatsoever.
Well, they're not creating it, but they are supporters of it. Because Wendy, I've actually had clients who are young too, who face ageism because they're young and they look young. Like, oh, well, we can't promote you because, you look like you're 19. So, I mean, we have ageism on both ends of the spectrum. Part of the issue is that we put people in categories and then we make assumptions about them based on those categories. So
Right.
we make assumptions about millennials, we make assumptions about boomers and the silent generation, the older generation. But it's when we believe in those assumptions and stereotypes that, that's where the real danger is.
Right. And that's why we have so much ageism and, as you're saying, sexism.
Yeah, but I think we have to start with ourselves and take a good look at some of the assumptions about age that we have internalized, and especially as women, because those assumptions hold us back. If we feel that we're too old to be promoted or too old to compete, or that we need to look, 30 to be able to make it at work. In sometimes subtle and maybe not so subtle ways, that affects the way we position ourselves, the way we communicate, and we sabotage ourselves in some of these ways when we believe those assumptions, when we hold ourselves back because of the fears we have about aging.
But isn't that just, once again, human nature? And then it crosses over into the workplace?
Well, for instance, if I feel that I am too old to compete, too old to get a promotion, there's a job opening at the next level up, and you're very qualified for it, and you've got a great track record, but you look around and there are other people, maybe 10, 20 years younger, who also would love to have that promotion. And you believe that, wow, well, I'm say, 60, 65. There's no way they're going to promote me. So number one, I may not even put my hat in the ring.
Right.
Even though I can offer value and I have a lot of value to, to give this organization. I can help the company reach its objectives, but I'm not going to even throw my hat in the ring.
Yeah.
Right. I don't even position myself well for advancement. I don't really take a stand on things. I don't want to be more visible. So I don't raise my hand. I don't offer new ideas. I'm afraid that people are going to mock me because I'm the oldest person at the table and I'm the oldest woman at the table. So that's just an example of how we may hesitate. We may hold ourselves back because we believe that at a certain age, we will not be promoted.
Right. So the fear factor of losing the job is what keeps us in an unhappy job. But and then what? And then what happens? You stay, and now you're in an unhappy job. Now you're miserable. So you kind of have to grab yourself by the balls, so to speak, and go for it. Because what's the worst that can happen? I mean, you're already afraid you're going to lose your job, or they could give you the promotion, or you could lose your job, or you could just stay in the same place that you were, just kind of like everyone else that,
Well, I would applaud that woman. That's badass, Wendy. But I don't see that that's the majority of women, and especially when we're faced with all the demeaning remarks and treatment and behavior of others in the workplace. It kind of gnaws. It just, at any kind of confidence that we may have that we can step up at that age.
Okay, so I guess I'm trying to figure it out because these are all women of age that you're talking about, and they on an average, I suppose, are all having the same problem. They're experiencing ageism and sexism at the same time, but at the same time, it appears that they're also probably needing a little coaching in their own lives in order to have the self-respect. They say that you really should, if you're to the point where you're in your 60s and you're still in a position like that you really should be using that time for planning what's coming next while you still have a job and still have the money coming in. Because it does take some planning on what you're going to do next, regardless. Regardless, once you reach a certain age, you should be planning on that.
I think that, one of the reasons why I wrote the book, Not Done Yet, is really to help women stay marketable and keep their jobs. And so everything that I outline in that book is how to maintain your status, regardless of your age, because it affects our financial future, our financial viability. But part of being strategic is thinking through what will what do I want to do in these next 5-10 years professionally, and put a
Right.
plan in place that will help you reach whatever your goals are. And even if you don't plan on retiring, you might consider what a plan B might be. And that might be, doing some kind of a side hustle.
Right.
Maybe that turns into,
Repotting.
you said a lot of people over 60 have started, are entrepreneurs. That's true. A couple of years
Exactly.
ago, I did a lot of research about women and ambition. And I wanted to know how women felt about being ambitious, whether they self-identified as being ambitious. And I did this across a span of women in their mid-20s to mid-60s. And what was interesting is that
Interesting.
in the beginning, when women entered the workplace, they had a lot of ambition. Child rearing years, et cetera, it might have dipped a little bit. But then as they hit 50, that ambition picked up again. So I think that regardless of the situation that you're in, if you're in the corporate environment, you need to declare your ambition and know your value and try your best to maintain your status. If you lose that job, you need to also figure out how you can continue to add value in another way. And does that mean some kind of a side hustle or volunteering or, working with another organization, finding a new job?
That's kind of a personal thing, right? Because you have to always consider what's your health status as you get older, what's your financial status. I know that there are a lot of boomers that don't have any savings whatsoever, and now with COVID, God only knows. You have to be willing to understand how to make a transition into a new life out of the corporate space.
It's a personal decision.
Yeah, there are a lot of things to consider, and there's a lot of things to consider by way of if you are reinventing yourself, if you are repotting yourself, if you are becoming an entrepreneur over 50, over 60, over 70, you might have the wisdom and you might even have the passion and the stamina to do that. But there are a lot of things to learn about making that type of transition in your life.
Oh, I know. I mean, I did that. I made that transition.
Well, I've got to make a transition right now, and that means it is the end of the show. So, Bonnie, thank you so much for being here. I know that everyone can get your book on Amazon, and they can also find your podcast everywhere they download their podcasts. And you are on LinkedIn, or they can just go to BonnieMarcusLeadership.com. So thanks for being here, Bonnie.
Thanks, Wendy.
Well, that wraps up another episode of The Wendy Cooper Show, conversations with remarkable people, period. Thanks for listening, everyone. Thank you, Tom Orsi, for the theme music. Thank you, C-Spot Run Productions, for helping me produce this episode. Until next time, make sure to leave me a review somewhere. Thanks for listening.